I have been very hesitant to review Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League because it feels like a game you're not allowed to like or dislike without an angry Twitter mob going after you for your opinion, but I still haven't heard a review that fully encapsulates my feelings, and so I wanted to add my voice to the mix. And if you'd like to, feel free to do the same. Comment below, let me know, did you like the game, did you not like the game? Let's just keep it civil. The amount of hostility and vitriol around this game is insane, and I just want to have an open dialogue without people trying to hurl personal insults at each other, but let's get into it. So I'm one of the biggest Arkham fans you will probably ever meet. Like, my current number of Arkham City replays is maybe in the dozens. Like, I should probably go see somebody about my addiction to Arkham. It's one of my favorite franchises in gaming of all time. Everything from the free-flow combat and stealth encounters to the detailed open worlds and breakneck narrative pacing made for deeply compelling experiences. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever said this, but one of its biggest successes is that it made you feel like Batman.
Arkham Asylum makes you feel like you're Batman.
Needless to say, I was very excited when Rocksteady announced that Suicide Squad would be a sequel to Batman Arkham Knight, especially because not only was it going to be a sequel to Arkham Knight, it was going to introduce the Justice League. You were going to visit Metropolis. There was multiplayer functionality and a host of other new features that sounded very exciting. Even when we learned that the game would follow a live service model and would break away from the Arkham formula in favor of looter-shooter mechanics, I remained optimistic. I thought a change in genre could fit the new characters and keep the gameplay feeling fresh instead of feeling like a carbon copy of what Rocksteady has done before. I'm also a fan of games like The Division and was certainly not opposed to the game receiving new content for months or even years to come. I also had a positive experience with the alpha and was thoroughly convinced to pre-order the game. And now, after having extensively played through Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League story and endgame content, I can definitively say that the game is, like, pretty good. I would be lying if I said I wasn't let down by this game, but not because it's bad, and that's a distinction I really want to hammer home. I don't think this is a bad game. Everything from the audio design, to the score, to the open world environments, to some of the best facial animations for characters I've ever seen in a video game is actually very technically impressive on a multitude of levels. There was a lot in this game that worked for me, so why did it leave me disappointed? It's because of the stuff that didn't work for me. I wanted to walk away from this game giving it a 10 out of 10, singing its praises, saying it's one of the best superhero games of all time, but in good conscience of my actual opinion, I cannot do that. I know what Rocksteady Studios is capable of, yet for me, this one just didn't reach the same benchmark that their previous efforts did. Now let's start with the elephant in the room, which is this game is called Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and that title is also its synopsis. You play as Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, and King Shark as you murder the Justice League, kill Brainiac, and that is it. The only real twist that you experience in this game is an introduction to the multiverse, which is introduced as endgame content, and it's what you'll be doing for the remainder of the post-launch content. Now, I already feel like too many loaded statements and disingenuous remarks have been made regarding real-life tragedies and how they aren't respected well enough in this game, or the characters weren't treated with enough dignity in relation to what's happened in the real world, and I don't think that's fair. Clearly, Rocksteady's intention was not to be disrespectful to anybody, and in fact, they've found many ways to honor those who have passed away in their game. They have really beautiful in-game memorials to them. With that being said, on a purely face value, I can't say I enjoyed killing the Justice League. I found some of the boss fights to be kind of fun, but watching the Flash fall over after taking enough bullets, watching Green Lantern die, watching Batman get shot in the face, watching Superman die, it all just felt really depressing. But then there was a disconnected execution in how the story plays out. When the Flash dies, Captain Boomerang whips out his dick and pees on him. When Batman dies, they're making jokes about it as Superman shows up. It doesn't feel like it matches my emotions regarding what is happening, and therefore I'm unable to empathize with the squad. That's why I never felt this Suicide Squad particularly likable. There also wasn't much of a redemption arc for the squad in this game, and you might argue that that's not needed. This is a game where these characters are doing what they're doing purely because they have bombs in their heads. They don't care about the fate of the world, they just want less prison time, and that's all there is to it. But personally, my favorite Suicide Squad stories are the ones where I start rooting for them. and the only character that even came remotely close to that was Deadshot. With all that being said though, there was quite a bit in the story that actually did work for me. I did like a lot of the banter between the squad members. I thought that seeing Arkhamverse, Superman, and Wonder Woman fight across Metropolis looked really cool. There's a moment early on in the game where you're going up against the Flash, and if you're playing as Captain Boomerang, Flash comes up, takes off all your clothes, so you're running around in your underwear. That was funny. Like, those were clever moments that I really enjoyed. It's also fair to say that the story is not over. Now, whether that's an approach you think was smart or not, I think is up to you. I didn't love where they ended the story. It feels like it ends at the midpoint. I felt like we were getting a lot of really interesting traction leading up to the end of the base campaign, but then it kind of just awkwardly ends and says, oh yeah, and you have to kill Brainiac 13 more times, or 12 more times. It felt kind of underwhelming. It's going to be really interesting to see what the reception to the post-launch content is, because if the base game hasn't attracted enough attention or given people enough of a reason to stick around, I think it could all fly under the radar. On the other hand, there are events that could transpire in the DLC that really change people's perspective on the game and bring a much larger audience to it. Only time will really tell if that base experience got enough people interested to see where the story was going, or if it felt too doom and gloom without enough of a tease for a more hopeful future. I personally am at the very least interested to see where the story is going, but if after 1 or 2 seasons it hasn't started to become a more interesting story, I could see myself losing interest very quickly. As far as gameplay goes, I actually found the gunplay surprisingly addictive. Rocksteady did a good job of marrying third-person shooter mechanics to superhero or supervillain empowerment in this case. I did think it was a missed opportunity to have every character's gunplay function pretty much the same, especially because their unique traversal abilities was one of the highlights of the game. Having there be such a different flavor between how each character gets around was so cool, and so the fact that they all fought in exactly the same way was less cool, and I found that to be more disappointing. It would have been interesting if King Shark hadn't had a gun at all, and he'd had to rely purely on brute strength to do what he needed to do in combat. Generally speaking though, at face value, I found the gunplay to be quite fun. I did notice that Rocksteady had a difficult balancing act to maintain that they mostly did a good job with, which was the level of difficulty. There were many moments where the game felt far too easy, and then there were other times where the game didn't feel hard, but it felt frustrating because too much was happening. The only way that Suicide Squad is able to really become difficult is when they spawn in more enemies, which starts to make the performance of the game suffer, and it starts to become too difficult to really determine what's going on. There are moments where you're getting spammed by too many enemies at once from too many directions, and there's nothing you can do to avoid the attacks. Those were the only times I died in the game, and again, it wasn't really a difficulty curve as much as just kind of a frustrating, inauthentic way to make the game feel more difficult. I also really liked Metropolis. I thought the environments here looked really nice. I loved all the Easter eggs. I liked the return of Riddler trophies. My biggest disappointment in the open world activities was the repetition of them. A lot of people have told me that one of the big strengths Suicide Squad will have over Arkham is the endgame content, the fact that Metropolis will still have things to do. But honestly, after playing the endgame content for a number of hours, I can't say that I prefer it over the challenge maps of the Arkham games, which I think one could argue were the endgame of the Arkham games. Another dramatic drop in quality came with the side missions. In the Arkham games, the side missions were so cool. They kind of felt like deleted scenes. In Arkham City and Arkham Origins, you'd go up against characters like Black Mask, Mad Hatter, Hush, Zsasz. It all felt really cool, and they had their own little narratives, and it broke away from the traditional gameplay loop and gave you something else to do. But here, there's none of that. It's the same missions where you have to go and defend a truck or go and defend one of Poison Ivy's plants, and then you get some rewards at the end of it. That brings me to the issue with the gear. I actually had a lot of fun going in, customizing my character's looks and loadouts. I thought that was one of the game's strengths, but the issue was that the loadout was never being populated with interesting gear. Even now, as I play through the endgame on higher and higher difficulties, it's becoming frustrating as I'm not being awarded gear that has higher stats than my current gear. You also have to be very careful to read what you are equipping to your character because some of the gear doesn't function in a sensical way. I'll give you an example. I went to do a side mission where the only way you could damage enemies was with grenades, and I quickly realized my grenades were doing no damage. It was because my build of Harley Quinn, who I had just switched to, had auto-equipped a grenade that dealt no damage. That was such a frustrating moment and something that didn't feel like it was on me. It felt like it was something that the game had done. Now, obviously you can turn off auto-equipping, but that felt like, in an odd way, kind of an irresponsible thing for my character to do. And then it felt irresponsible for the game to not warn me that I had a build that was incompatible with the mission. The rewards that I actually had the most fun playing with weren't any of the guns or grenades or weapons, but the afflictions that Poison Ivy was able to create. In the game, Poison Ivy is able to tap into the abilities of characters like Bane, Diablo, and Livewire, and give you abilities such as burning enemies, electrocuting enemies, freezing enemies, driving them into a frenzy, and those were really fun to play with. My current build of Harley Quinn, for example, functions a lot like a cross between Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. My Harley is dressed in green. She has the ability to drive enemies into a frenzy to fight for her instead of attacking her, and it's really fun. I like my current build of Captain Boomerang, who electrocutes everyone. My Deadshot burns everybody. It's a fun way to add your own personal spin to each of the characters. But once again, the way that you get these afflictions is by defending Poison Ivy's plants. How much cooler would it have been if I could have fought Diablo, or fought Livewire, or gone and had a cutscene where Bane is forced by Amanda Waller to hand over his venom? Or better yet, what if I could have played as these characters? What if I could have gone and recruited Bane to the squad and put him in the loadout? This is where we start reaching that issue where the game feels like it can't quite balance the fact that it's a live service game built around gear, and it's also trying to maintain its narrative quality that Arkham fans love. Maybe foolishly, I went into this game thinking that the side missions, for example, would be up to par with what we saw in the Arkham games. I thought, hey, maybe for one of them we'll go to Gotham and fight the Bat family. Maybe for one of them we'll go to Star City and fight Green Arrow. Maybe for one of them we'll get to visit Atlantis and fight Aquaman. But people will say, well, it's not trying to be a game built around a narrative, and so the side missions are going to be about getting loot and gear and not about these cool narrative beats. And I've just never understood that mentality. I don't understand the notion that this type of game couldn't evolve, that Rocksteady couldn't put their own spin on it and marry it more to the Arkham style of gameplay, in the sense of how side missions and the open world operate. I'm totally okay with the shooting mechanics and everything, but it would have been cool if they'd been able to carry in some of those more dynamic elements of the open worlds that we saw in the Arkham games. As far as the gear and loot operates, again, I had fun building it out, but there's only so much fun I can really have with it, and I feel like I'm at the tail end of my enjoyment with how that is functioning. And so if that is how the gameplay loop is going to try and satisfy me throughout all of the post-launch content, it may have already lost me. I think if instead the game had also emphasized more of those narrative beats and really tried to introduce dynamic side missions that allowed you to experience characters outside of the main story, then there would be a reason for me to continue to progress, because I would feel like there was a narrative progression rather than just upgrading my characters with infinite ability points and going through my loadout and equipping slightly more interesting weapons. Because ultimately, when nothing new is happening in the story and when there's nothing that I think I might experience by exploring the world further, I personally start to shut down and just don't have much interest in doing so. Now, with all that being said, I did enjoy playing through Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I didn't love it, and there were moments that really left a bitter taste in my mouth. But in general, I had a good time. Not only that, but I think that there is a lot of potential with post-launch content to turn this into something that is much better. Rocksteady has a wonderful opportunity here to increase mission variety and increase the number of characters in the story and change the trajectory of the story. Perhaps more than any other superhero game before it, except Avengers and arguably Gotham Knights, Rocksteady is well positioned to shift this into something that has a total 180 in terms of public reception. Ultimately, I think this game's biggest sin is the same sin that has plagued superhero video games since Marvel's Avengers and has gone through Gotham Knights. It's a game that's trying to satisfy too many people. It's trying to satisfy fans of the looter shooter genre. It's trying to serve fans of RPG games. It's trying to serve the Arkham community. It's trying to do too many things at once. Even when you look at a game like Guardians of the Galaxy, that game knew what it was. It introduced shooter mechanics as well, but it was single player. It was linear. It didn't have the staples that a lot of games like Arkham had, but because it had an identity and knew what it was able to be successful. If this game had been a linear multiplayer story-driven game, I think it would have worked great. If this had been an MMO that basically said, we're going to be DC Universe Online, but with better graphics, where you get to create your own squad member, and they'd fully committed to that style of game, I think it could have been great. And even though my issues with this game are different than the issues that I had with Gotham Knights, for example, I feel like they're all symptoms of the same problem. The game ends up feeling shallow because it's trying to accomplish too much, and then it's stretched too thin in every regard. As it stands right now, the endgame has very little content and very repetitive missions. The story, on the other hand, was really short and underwhelming in many regards. As future superhero games get greenlit and produced, I really hope that we see more of a focus. I hope that these games get a clearer direction. If it's an action-adventure, single-player, open-world game, awesome. If it's a linear, multiplayer looter shooter, awesome. If it's an open-world multiplayer game that gets new content periodically over 3 years, cool. But just make sure it's dedicated and works for the IP. I'm getting a little burned out of games that try to appeal to too many people and end up not really fitting the bill for anybody. And like I said at the beginning of the video, nothing in this game is glaringly bad. It kind of like Gotham Knights just feels like it was stretched too thin and feels a little bit shallow in a lot of the areas that I would have really liked to see more depth. Overall, I'm going to give Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League a 7.5 out of 10 for now. And the reason I say for now is that there is a lot of upcoming future content for the game. And once I play it, my opinion might change. If my score jumps from 7.5 to 8.5 or 9 out of 10, I will update my score for you guys and let you know why I think it has improved. If the post-launch content of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League contains interesting narrative beats and more mission variety, there's a good chance that I will have a much higher opinion of this game. But as it stands right now, it's another superhero game that I like but don't love, and that's disappointing. Thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this review, and let me know again in the comments what you thought of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Thanks again for watching. We will see you guys in the next one.